you're all in the business of trying to get other people to see differently. If you want someone to see differently, you need to understand the principles by which the brain sees in the first place. And then maybe we can apply those principles to help not just other people to see differently, but ourselves to see differently. And why might we want to do this is because the world is increasingly changing. And it's not just changing, it's changing unpredictably. So the more interconnected we become, the more unpredictable do not only our global lives, but our individual lives become as well. Okay? And what's more, the challenges are no longer just local, they're also global. Right? So what happens in one part of the world now affects the other part of the world the next day or even within seconds. And what's more, the future that we're actually moving towards doesn't yet exist. I mean, interesting statistic is that the top 10 in demands in 2010 didn't even exist in 2004, or much less 2000. It's not like they were less popular. We didn't even know that they were going to arrive. So we're educating children now for a world that doesn't even exist. In fact, the world in 10 years' time, we don't even know what it's going to be. So we have to adapt or die. This is a fundamental tenet of nature. The most successful systems are the systems that are adaptable. Not just that they adapt, but they're adaptable. And there are two sides to adaptation, which we might call innovation. You have on one side, you have creativity, and on the other side, you have efficiency. And almost every organization focuses on efficiency, right? Trying to get more for less. Right? And the more the world changes, the more we focus on efficiency. And the best environment to maximize efficiency in nature is competition. It's a very good idea if you're trying to get more for less, but a very bad idea if you're trying to actually be creative. So we're going to focus on the other side of that equation. Rather than efficiency, we're going to focus on creativity. And an interesting survey poll in LinkedIn demonstrated that in the top 10 skills for jobs at the moment, number 3 is adaptability, number 1 is creativity. Okay? So creativity is to perceive differently. Right? So to perceive, perception underpins everything that you do. Not just the choices you make, but what you know, what you believe, the people you fall in love with, the clothes you wear. Everything begins with the perception. To understand perception is not only understand how the brain works, it's to understand what it is to be human. Okay, and I have one aim in this talk, right? I have the same aim I have in every single talk, which is I want you to know less at the end than you think you know now, right? I want you to doubt at the most fundamental level. Why? Because nothing interesting begins with knowing. It begins with not knowing. And I want you to not know at the deepest level. So how many of you, when you woke up this morning, thought you saw the world as it really is? No one? How did you get here if you're not seeing the world accurately? This is a fundamental question that goes back thousands of years. Did we evolve to see the world accurately or not? If you're not, I think you all think you see the world accurately. How many believe in the idea of illusions, that illusions exist? Yes? Okay, the definition of illusion is to see the world differently from the way it really is. So if you believe illusions, you think you see the world accurately most of the time, it's just that sometimes you get it wrong. So let's do a test, right? 90% of the information comes from grayscale. And there's a predator. Now, let's try something a little bit easier. Let's just try lightness, right? Even jellyfish see lightness, and they don't even have a brain. So surely people here at Flow can see the world of lightness accurately. It's the simplest perception you have, which is the intensity of light. So if we're seeing the world accurately, then things that are the same should always look the same, and things that are different should look different. These two dots are physically the same, and they look the same, yes? Now what happens if we don't change the dots, but we change what surrounds them? Do they still look the same? The one on the left probably look lighter than the one on the right, yes? If they don't, see me after. Okay? And this makes a fundamental point about perception, which again underpins everything it is to you. which is that context is everything. Your brain did not evolve to see absolutes. It's not interested in absolutes. Right? Your brain evolved to find relationships. Right? More than this, to understand how and why we see is actually what it is to understand what it is to be human. So not just that we see relationships, but why do we see relationships? I'm going to tiptoe across this.
It's fine.
It's fine? All right, I'd rather be on here. So instead of telling you, I'm going to show you. I want you to hold up your finger to me, and I want you to line up your finger to me so that your finger and I are the same size. So move it towards you, away from you. Okay, line up your finger towards me. All right? Do you have it? Okay, we're not the same size. Right? But the only information that your brain gets from the visual world is through your retina. Right? And at that point, your retina was telling your brain that your finger and me are the same size. So if you remember anything, in fact, the fundamental principles I've colored differently in the slides. They're all purple. Right? If you remember anything, remember this. Data is meaningless. Right? How many of you are working on big data? Data's pointless, which makes you essential. Right? Data's useful, but it's literally not meaningful. Right? Even the data, the most fundamental data that your brain is receiving is meaningless. It has no meaning. It could mean something large and far away, or something small and up close. Something loud and far away, or quiet and up close. Right? It doesn't come with instructions. It doesn't tell you what to do. Right? So, it could literally mean anything. So how does your brain deal with uncertainty? In fact, this is the fundamental problem that your brain evolved to solve. And not just your brain, every single brain evolved to solve this problem. Right? If the data that your brain is receiving right now is meaningless, what's the other source of data that your brain has access to? What's the other source that you have access to? History, right? The functional structure of your brain is literally a physical manifestation of your past interactions with the world. That's what your brain means. That's what it's literally encoding. Okay? So, your brain makes meaning by continually redefining normality, by continually adapting to change. Your brain is evolved to evolve. It's adapted to adapt. And I want to show you how quickly your brain can redefine normality using just color. So first I want you to notice that these two desert scenes are exactly the same. One is just the flipping of the other, okay? They're the same color. Now I want you to stare at the dot between the red and the green. Don't look anywhere else. I just want you to stare at that dot. And we're going to do it for about 30 seconds. Imagine what's true in everything else that your brain is doing. And what's more, your brain redefines normality, not by passively receiving content, not by passively receiving Facebook posts. That's not your brain, where your brain lives. Your brain evolved in a body, and your body in a world. Silicon Valley keeps forgetting this. Right? We make meaning by physically engaging with the world. I'll give you an example. This is an experiment that was done in the 1960s with two kittens. Recently born, eyes just open. Okay? One of the kittens, they allowed to run on the ground. And the other kitten was suspended in a basket. And the one in the basket was actually connected to the one on the ground. So wherever the one on the ground went, the one in the basket also went. The point is they had the same visual experience of the world. And after about a week or so, they test the vision of the one on the ground, and it sees perfectly fine, as you would expect. But what about the one in the basket? What does it see? It's had the same visual experience of the world. It's blind. It's never been able to physically interact with the sources of meaningless data and make meaning from it. So though its eyes are open, it has nothing to see. Because your brain did not evolve to see data. Data's meaningless. Your brain evolved to see a meaning that's a consequence of your physical interaction with the world. Your brain reaches out and makes meaning from the meaningless. That's how it survives. And as you let the kitten run around for a while, it literally learns to see. So when you open up your eyes, what do you see? You can never see the world as it really is. We're forever separate from that physical world. The physical world exists, right? But we just don't see it. Nor do we see the data, because that would be pointless. It could mean anything. Instead, your brain evolved to see something else. Your brain evolved to see a meaning that was useful to see in the past. And I don't mean just your past. I mean the past of your family, your past of your culture, your evolutionary history. You come into the world with a huge number of experiences. In fact, most of your life happened without you even there. Your brain evolved to see the meaning that was useful to see in the past. So what do I mean by meaning? We're going to do a little test. We're doing sort of an English test, right? So what I want you to do is I want you to read what you see in the next few slides. We'll do it all together, okay? So read what you see in the next few slides. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Very good. 1, 2, 3. Very good. 1, 2, 3. No? Okay. How about this? 1, 2, 3. What are you reading, class? Remember the instructions. I said, read what you see. You all failed. There are no words there. That literally says, what are reading? Right? There's no law of physics that tells you have to put an H between that W and A. Why did you do so? Because your brain has encoded the statistics of co-occurring letters in the English and other languages. So when you're presented with a completely arbitrary code, remember, this doesn't exist if we don't. And you're presented with a W space AT, you put an H there. Why? Because it was useful to do so in the past, so you do so again. Right? And you can't help but do so. You don't put anything on the other side of that T. Why? Because it wasn't useful. So you didn't do so again. And also notice none of you read, what are you dreaming? Why? Because I had you reading, and that was your recent history. So you interpreted a completely meaningless code according to the statistics of your past experience, including the experience of the last 5 seconds. And what's true for language is true for every single one of our perceptions, even at the lowest level of lightness and color. So here you have a cube. This is something I made about 15 years ago. You'll see this cube. You'll see a dark brown tile at the top, yes? And a light orange tile at the side. So you see a dark brown tile here and a light orange tile here. Okay? That is your perceptual reality. You would bet your life that they are different, when in fact, they are exactly the same. Right? Nothing on the screen is changing. What you're seeing is not the data, you're seeing the meaning of the data. Right? And now, at this point, your brain is doing something really quite miraculous. You're entertaining 2 realities at the same time. You see one reality, but you also know another. And that is the beginning of what it is to be creative. To be able to hold 2 possibilities at the same time, and our brain evolved to do this. And what's true for color is also true for more complex perceptions. So this is from a documentary we worked on with BBC, and this is looking at the relationship between sound and light. So first I'm going to play the video, and you're going to hear a sound, okay?
Ba,
You hear a ba, like an F.
ba, ba, ba.
Okay? On the right, you're going to hear a ba, like a boy, ba.
Ba, 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 ba.
Simple, right? So on the left, you hear a fa, and the right, you hear a ba.
Ba, 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 ba,
Yes.
ba, ba.
Close your eyes.
Ba, ba,
Close your eyes.
ba,
How many sounds do you hear?
ba, ba,
One sound.
ba, ba.
There's only
ba,
ever one sound.
ba.
If you see his
ba,
lips make the shape of
ba,
F, you hear a fa. If you see his lips make the shape of a V, you hear a ba.
ba.
Nothing
ba.
is changing.
Ba, ba.
We can look at this all day.
Ba.
Some of us do.
Ba.
Right?
Ba.
And not only this, the context is your mind itself, right? So here, I'm going to play one sound. I'm not even going to tell you, all right? I'm going to play one sound. It's never changing. Your intention is deciding what you hear. which means you have no free will. Right? Everything you're doing is a reflex. Just like when you go to the doctor and he or she hits your patellar tendon, your leg goes out. Every perception you have throughout up to this point, I knew what you're going to have. Right? Every perception, every behavior is a reflex grounded in your history to get not just your history, the history of your culture, your evolutionary ancestors. Right? Every moment you're doing is a reflex grounded in history. And you're generating behavior that was useful in the past. Right? So imagine, it's like you're this little person in the center of this space, and this is your space of possibility. And at every moment in time, your brain never does a big jump. I can't get from here to the door without passing through the space in between. Your brain never does a big jump. It only ever makes small steps. Right? And it makes a small step to the next most likely possible. But what determines what's possible is this space. But the space is constrained by your bias and assumptions. Right? By your bias and assumptions. So information comes in, and you make a step to the next most likely possible. Right? Even if that next solution is a less good solution. So there might be a great solution in the upper right corner, represented by the big circle. But it's not that you can't even see it. All you do is make a step to the next most likely possible, depending on our biases and assumptions. Because that's what history gives us. It gives us our bias and assumptions. So when you open up your eyes, you're always using bias and assumptions. So this concept of stepping outside the box is actually a really silly idea, because all you do is you step inside a new box. Right? You can never step outside your bias and assumptions. And these biases and assumptions are essential for your survival. Every time I take a step, I have hundreds of assumptions that my legs aren't going to give away, the floors aren't going to give away. They keep you alive. But they also constrain your behavior. Right? And more than this, your assumptions and perceptions just don't stay inside your head. You actually project them out into the world. Right? This screen is not blue. There's light, but it's not color. The color blue couldn't be any closer to you, right? It's inside your head, projected outward. You are literally coloring this screen. So if a tree falls in the wood and no one's there to hear it, does it make a sound? No. It creates energy. But the sound is a consequence of your brain. And what's true for color is also true for other perceptions, right? Even complex perceptions like emotions. So here we have two triangles in a circle, mean absolutely nothing, until I put them into motion. This is a film from the mid-1940s. And you're going to project a meaning onto these shapes. You hate one of the triangles. You're feeling bad for the other one. You're worried for the circle, right? And we're going to stop it there. And you're all wondering, what happens to the circle, right? And the answer is nothing. It's a circle. But you can't help but project that meaning onto that. And what's true for shapes is also true for other people. Everything I'm saying to you right now is literally meaningless. You are constructing the meaning based on your history. Every perception of another person, every personality you've ever perceived another person is literally inside you, projected outward. Just like we color shapes, we color other people. The meaning of another person is actually inside you, projected outward. We are a group within, which means when it comes to perception, which underpins everything it is to be you, we are just like this frog. And I don't mean metaphorically like this frog. We are literally like this frog. Okay, this is virtual reality for a frog. It's generally getting stimulus and generating behavior that was useful in the past and doing quite well. Just like us. We're so like that frog in so many ways. When it doesn't go quite our way, we get a bit annoyed, none of which actually even existed. So if everything you're doing is a reflex grounded in your history, right? How is it ever possible to deviate? How could we ever see differently? It seems impossible. Well, the answer is actually quite simple, right? It's quite basic, but very difficult to apply. And the answer is this. If you change your assumptions, you'll change your perceptions. Because your assumptions determine your space of possibility, determines what sits right next to you. You change your assumptions, you change that space, and you'll change what's right next to you. But it changes unpredictably. You can't control it. Right? So creativity, so actually let's just do a test. Let me show you how powerful it is to change your assumptions. Okay? We all come into the world with the assumption that we look down onto surfaces. That's part of all of our brains. We also assume that light comes from above, etc. So when I spin this wireframe diamond, you'll see it spinning from left to right. Okay? That's because you're assuming you're looking down on that surface. Okay? So in your space of possibility, the most likely source of this data is that it is a diamond spinning from left to right. And so that's what you see. But now I want you to change your assumption. I want you to imagine you're looking up at the surface rather than down. Okay? Keep looking around it. Sometimes it helps to blur your eyes and blink, and suddenly it'll flip and go in the opposite direction. How many can get it to flip? And every time you blink, it'll flip in the opposite direction. What you're doing is you're changing your assumptions to whether you're looking down or up at that surface. The diamond is not changing. You are changing it. How many can get it to flip now? Yes? So notice that what was impossible to see previously is now inevitable. And what was inevitable is now impossible. All you've done is you've changed your assumptions about whether you're looking up or down at that surface. And we're only talking about motion. So imagine what's true in everything else that we do. So a quick question, by the way. Which direction is it actually rotating? How many people say left to right? How many say right to left? How many say, I don't care? What if I were to tell you that there's no motion on the screen at all, that nothing's moving? Would you believe me? Okay, nothing is moving. There's literally no motion on the screen right now. You are constructing the motion. Why? Because you're looking at an animation. An animation is a series of still images that are slightly different from each other, right? You're seeing the meaning of the change and not the change. If I were to take those same sequence of images and put them in random order, you would see flickering. So you're taking something that is not moving, perceiving it to move, and then flipping it from one direction of motion to the other just by thinking about it, by changing your assumptions. So this notion that creativity is this chaotic, messy, serendipitous process is completely wrong, right? There is nothing creative about creativity. Creativity is only creative from the outside, not from the inside. We typically think of creativity about how someone brings two things that are far apart together. We think, wow, that's amazing. How did they do that? They're not, right? They are just making a step to their most likely possible. It's for you that they're far apart. It's because you have a different space of possibility. You have different biases, different assumptions, because you have a different history. Right? Which means that this concept of creativity is nothing other than making small steps, but changing your space of possibility by changing your assumptions. And then taking another step, and then questioning, and then taking a step. Which means we can all be creative in everything that we do, right? But why is it so hard to change our assumptions? If that's the basis of creativity, why is it so difficult? I'm going to give you two reasons. The first one is, we've all been educated to be objective. We think we have an objective view of the world. It's just that sometimes we get it wrong, right? When in fact we are delusional, right? And that's what makes the brain powerful. That you can be an active participant in your process of making meaning, and not just by passively receiving it. right? Because we perceived not the history of what happened, we perceived the history of the meaning of what happened. So everything you're doing right now becomes part of your future past. Right? The meanings that you apply to a stimulus now will be parts of the future past that you will actually generate your behaviors. Here's an example. In the UK, we have 2 taps. One hot, one cold. Why? It's a very bad idea. You get your hands really hot and then you have to cool them down. You get them hot, you cool them down. Right? Why do we do this? It's because many years ago, the hot water tank was an open bathtub that was in the attic. And dust and mouse droppings and filth would get into the water, so it was dangerous to drink hot water. So we separated the hot water from the cold water, because the cold water came from the mains. We no longer have bathtubs in the attic, but we still have these taps. Why? Because we always did. Right? So let's rethink design thinking. Almost always design thinking begins with a problem. And we try to solve that problem. You can come up with a great solution, right? But if it's a stupid problem, who really cares? Right? The cache begins with a great question. Right? Finding a really good question is hard, which is why change begins with not knowing. Change begins with humility. Creativity begins with humility. Number 2, and this is the most important, that if everything begins with doubt, everything begins with questions, the biggest challenge with that is that we hate not knowing. We hate it. If you weren't sure that was a predator, it was too late. Right? We evolved to take what is unknown and make it known. We evolved to take what is uncertain and make it certain. We hate not knowing. We fear the dark because we can't predict. Right? Dying is easy. And if during evolution you didn't know, you got selected out. And in fact, uncertainty is one of the biggest causes of stress in our environment. It decreases your immune function, right? Your brain cells actually wither and die when you're under the stress of uncertainty. You become less adaptable. Here's an example. This actually happened in Australia. This man's going in to rob the bank. He hands the teller the note, and the bank shuts down. He's trapped. He can't get out. He's under tremendous stress of uncertainty. His space of possibilities collapsed to a single dimension. What's the assumption that his brain is missing? That doors push as well as pull. He was trapped by his biases. He was caught 5 minutes later. Okay? Which is why we need closure. Your brain needs closure, right? So much so that the Game of Thrones show actually uses your need for closure by finishing every episode on a minor chord. As soon as they finish on a major chord, the show's over. Because you need that closure. So they're experts in knowing the nature of the minor chord that they finish on. They build up dopamine and they finish on a minor chord. Right? And notice what happens to your body when you experience closure, right? Which is why my studio and others are actually, all we do is we design along a single axis, the axis of uncertainty. We're either increasing it or we're decreasing it. And this is why Uber is successful. Uber is successful not because they enable you to get a taxi easier or faster, it's because they tell you when the taxi is going to arrive, right? And they will succeed or fail depending on how accurate they are in that prediction. So the only way we can change is by going to the very place we evolved to avoid. But fortunately, evolution gave us a solution to this. What is the one thing that you actually love? Where you love uncertainty. It's not that you tolerate it, you actually love it. You seek it in this one place. This one place is evolution's solution to uncertainty. It's why it evolved. Can you think of it? It's a 4-letter word. Food? Possibly, right? I'm not sure I want uncertainty in my food all the time, though. Right? It's play. Play is literally evolution to a solution. Evolution's solution to uncertainty. This is why play literally evolved. For those of us who study play, this is why it evolved. But play is a way of being. right? It's a way of being that actually celebrates uncertainty. It encourages diversity. It's open to possibility. It's inherently cooperative. It's what we call intrinsically motivating, right? What's the reward of play? It's play. Almost everything you do for its reward that's different from what you do. The reward of play is play itself, to propensate play. And if you add intention to play, what do you get? Right? Oh, actually, the most successful systems in nature are the ones that actually play to adulthood. They are the most adaptive systems. There's no inherent reason for making these bubbles other than to make them. And if you add intention to play, what do you get? You get science. Science is nothing other than play with intention. In fact, I'd argue that anything that is creative, that facilitates change, is play with intention. And when we employ this in a new education program for children from difficult backgrounds, it resulted in the youngest published scientist in the world from 8 to 10 years old, and the youngest ever TED speaker when she appeared with me on TED, right? At 12 years old. Which is why creativity and change requires courage, not confidence. To do something not knowing what's going to happen is courage. Which is why we need to reward care. You need the incentive to get beyond what's difficult. And in particular, the care for others. Right? And this is the role of technology. Right? The most innovative technologies are not the ones that enable us to do what we can already do easier, faster. Right? They make the invisible visible. Think of the sail of a boat invented on the Nile that enabled us to see cultures that we never saw before, to expand our space of possibility. Or radio telescope on the tops of mountains in Chile. Right? And what this also tells us is that we have to be in the world, including with our marketing. So how can we apply these principles? So I'm going to finish with this story about how we can apply these principles. Well, the first one is that we begin with a human value. We begin with the things that actually the brain cares about. Empathy, love, perceptions of awe and wonder. And then in my lab and studio, we create what we call experiential experiments. Not just experiments, but we make them experiential. Right? People are actually part of the process of discovery. They might even be involved in actually asking the questions. Okay? And we did this most recently with Cirque du Soleil, where we actually were asking the question about awe and wonder, about what is awe and who cares. And so what we did is recorded the brain activity of people during a Cirque du Soleil performance, as well as a change in the behavior of people before and after the performance. And what resulted in is true insight. Right? We demonstrated that awe is actually a state of the mind. We can record it, and we actually have an AI system that can predict whether or not people are experiencing awe and wonder to an accuracy of 75%. We also demonstrated that when people go to a Cirque performance, they actually leave transformed. This is not just entertainment. They actually change the perception not only of themselves, but of other people. They increase their tolerance for risk, their need for closure. Right? They became more pro-social. So this demonstrated the power of live. And when Cirque du Soleil used this as part of their PR and marketing campaign, it demonstrated not only impact, but actually facilitated loyalty. Because they were the source of people better understanding themselves. So we call this marketing purpose 2.0. It's not good enough just to say it. You actually have to generate the insight towards it. And make people part of that process. So I'm going to finish with this. Right? You're now leading people into uncertainty. I'm going to show you two types of leadership. Here's one. Right? Supportive. Leading the other into uncertainty. Here's the other. Right? Notice, looks up for reassurance. Right? What kind of leader are you? And the answer is you have to be both. Because I don't want you to leave this room right now and think and go to the street and have a bus coming at you and think, oh, I wonder if I can see this differently. No! Get out of the way as fast as possible. The problem is we live all our life as if everything's a bus. Wisdom is knowing not to be at the edge of chaos, but to be at the edge of chaos on average. When to be on one side or the other. And to create an ecology environment that enables other people to step into uncertainty. So be the sandbar for other people. And that will be the strongest way that you can actually facilitate your own change. So thank you very much. I hope that was useful.
There are many questions, many questions. We don't have too much time. I'd like to start with a little comment. There's a joke that says, you know, there are two kinds of people. One kind is the kind that likes closure. That's it.
Oh no!
Right. So let me ask you a few questions. Here's a question, might be born out of personal interest, from Jahan Irani, who works at BCCL. You gave your name and your company, so tough luck. What is your take on bringing on creativity or change in perception through consumption of substances that bring about chemical changes in your brain?
Chemical substances?
Yes.
Oh, I love this question. Okay, so in our awe and wonder experiment, right, it's a fascinating question about why did awe evolve. The argument is that awe evolved to enable us to go to the very place we evolved to avoid, which is uncertainty. When we feel awe, we feel small but connected to the world. What's interesting is that the same experience that people describe when they're on psilocybin, magic mushrooms. And we looked at the EEG recordings inside the brain, and they were highly correlated with when people were under psilocybin. Right? And we know that psilocybin can actually kick people out of depression for up to 6 months, single dose. So now we're actually using our research on awe and wonder to facilitate transformation. Right? And in particular, we're focusing on toleration, the ability to sit with difference of another person. And we actually have some preliminary data demonstrating that awe can be a facilitator of bringing people together, of conflict resolution. And this is the same thing that happens when people are on psychedelics.
All right, next question. This is from Alagappan, who works in Blue Chip Solutions. Have you ever trained judicial officers, and would they accept witnesses and witness testimony after you train them?
What's the question?
How reliable, have you ever trained people in the law, judicial officers, and after that, would they ever believe witness testimony and witness perception?
Yes. I have worked with people in the law. We work with a lot of people. That's why we call it the lab of mysteries, right? Because we have designers, we have musicians, we have dancers, curators, choreographers, marketing, branding, as well as scientists, and people in the legal profession. And clearly, our brain evolved. These are not mistakes of perception. Okay? Some people unfortunately use illusions in the wrong way. They demonstrate that our perceptions are fragile. Your perceptions are not fragile. If they were, you wouldn't be here. What they demonstrate is that we actually perceive to see something else. We did not evolve to see the world accurately. We evolved to see the world usefully, which is wonderful because it creates the possibility of empowerment. You can actually become part of that process of creativity, of discovery. So you're seeing the world usefully. So in terms of legal system, there still is a consensus, there still is value because people are still seeing things that were useful to see in the past. But it also creates a really interesting question about the legal system in general. That if you want to have people step into uncertainty, they need a certainty from which to step. Right? And you could argue that the legal system is exactly what that is providing the sandbar for all of us to actually step into uncertainty. My role as a parent is not to protect my children from risk, is to enable them to take it. Right? To be the sandbar that they can come back when they're swimming and to stand and to rest. And I'd argue that's what the legal system is doing.
So the next question is a practical question from Rochna Podar, who works at Chlorophyll. For organizations looking to tap into the power of neuromarketing, what's a good place to start?
Well, you can start with us. Where's a good place to start with neuromarketing? It depends on what your aims are. So there's one kind of neuromarketing where you use brain activity to determine whether people should want red or green, right? to determine rules. I'm not interested in rules, right? What I'm interested is not whether it should be red or green, but why it should be green. Because if you could understand the principles, then it transcends context. You can be adaptable, which means that actually when it comes to neuromarketing, we can use marketing as actually a fascinating tool to generate better insight into what it means to be human, and then you can PR and market that insight by creating real experiments that ask fundamental questions, but you do it in an experiential way that provides marketing and PR content, right? And that's what we actually try to do.
Okay, last question from Vistrit Bhatia, who works in Vivek Travels. He says, do you believe that reality varies from person to person as it is perceived by the brain through inputs from individual sense organs? And if yes, as marketers, how can we ensure that our marketing techniques are being perceived correctly by a large number of people if every single person's perception is completely individualistic?
Yeah. So first of all, there's two parts to the question. How do you know?
Yep.
And then how do you know for a lot of people?
Yep.
How do you know for a lot of people? The fact is, we're all human, right? You all saw the same illusions. There are things that are common between all of us, right? And then we actually can deviate from that. So if you can find the general principles of what it is to be human, then you can actually impact a large number of people that transcends culture, race, gender. But then you can actually adapt that to culture, race, or gender, depending on the particular history of that individual. So to know another person is to actually know what their biases and assumptions are. And so the second point is about quantification. And that's actually where we use science to actually measure the impact. And we're not talking questionnaires. Questionnaires, we know on average, are random. Because people give you answers that they would like to be true, not necessarily what is true. So we actually measure changes in the unconscious behavior and perceptions of people, and actually metrics within the brain and behavior to actually quantify whether or not we're having an impact.
All right.
Okay?
Thank you, Dr. Lotto.
Thank you very much.